Nike didn't run out of customers. It ran out of desire. People still buy sneakers. People still wear the swoosh. People still know the logo. But something inside sneaker culture has changed. The shoes are still there. The athletes are still there. The marketing is still everywhere. But the magic feels weaker. And for Nike, that is more dangerous than a bad quarter. Because Nike was never just selling shoes. It was selling status, identity, scarcity. The feeling that if you owned the right pair, you were connected to something bigger than yourself. A game, a legend, a city, a movement. But then Nike made one of the most dangerous mistakes a cultural empire can make. It made the culture too available, and when everyone can buy the symbol starts losing power. This is not just a story about sneakers. It is a story about brand psychology, consumer behavior, money, power, and the hidden danger of turning culture into a machine. Because Nike's problem was not that people stopped loving sneakers. The problem was that Nike made sneakers feel less special. And in business, that is a dangerous lesson. A product can still be famous. A logo can still be recognized. A company can still be powerful. But if the meaning behind the product gets weaker, the business starts losing something money cannot easily buy back. Desire. That is the part many brands misunderstand. Attention is not the same as desire. Visibility is not the same as loyalty. Being everywhere is not the same as being wanted. Nike's recent struggle is one of the clearest examples of what happens when a brand becomes so successful at creating hype that it starts believing hype can be manufactured forever. But culture does not work like a factory. You cannot simply produce more meaning. You cannot mass-produce exclusivity. You cannot turn every release into a moment and expect people to stay excited forever. At some point, the consumer notices the pattern. At some point, the drop stops feeling rare. At some point, the shoe stops feeling like a prize. And when that happens, the brand does not just lose sales, it loses control of desire. For decades, Nike understood something most companies spend their entire existence trying to learn. People do not only buy products, they buy what products say about them. A pair of Jordans was never just a pair of shoes. It was a story you could wear. A pair of Dunks was never just footwear. It was a signal. A pair of Air Maxes was never just a product. It was memory, nostalgia, and attitude stitched into one object. Nike's real power was not leather, not rubber, not even the swoosh. The power was meaning. Nike made people feel like the product was connected to greatness, to ambition, to sport, to street culture, to winning, to belonging. That is why Nike became more than a sportswear company. It became a desire company. Its greatest advertisements were never really about sneakers. They were about transformation. A runner crossing the finish line, a basketball player flying through the air, a kid looking at a poster of Michael Jordan and imagining a different life, a teenager saving money for a pair of shoes that felt bigger than the price tag. The shoe was only the object. The feeling was the product. And when a company sells feeling, it becomes extremely powerful, but also extremely vulnerable. Because feelings can change. Nike built its empire by connecting sport to identity. Then it crossed from sport into street culture. Basketball shoes became fashion. Running shoes became lifestyle. Skate shoes became collectibles. Old silhouettes became nostalgia. Limited releases became events. The sneaker became more than something you wore. It became something you hunted. And that changed everything. Because when a product becomes a hunt, the psychology changes. People do not just want the item, they want the win, they want the story, they want to say they got it when others could not. That is what made sneaker culture so powerful. It combined fashion, sport, status, nostalgia, scarcity, and competition into one object. The shoe became the trophy, and Nike mastered that world. The Air Jordan line turned athletes into mythology. The Dunk became a canvas for subcultures. The Air Force One became a streetwear staple. The Air Max became a symbol of style and memory. Every shoe carried a story. Every colorway could mean something. Every release could create a moment. This was not normal retail. This was cultural engineering. Nike learned how to make products feel like events. And when a product becomes an event, people do not just buy it. They wait for it. They talk about it. They post about it. They compete for it. They remember it. That is the highest level of brand power. But the same machine that made Nike powerful eventually created a trap. Because once hype becomes profitable, companies want to scale it. More drops, more colorways, more collaborations, more restocks, more apps, more limited releases that do not always feel truly limited. At first it works. The brand looks hotter, revenue grows, consumers keep chasing, resellers enter the market, social media amplifies everything, the culture feels alive. But over time, the machine starts feeding on itself. The brand becomes addicted to the same formulas, the same silhouettes, the same nostalgia, the same drop mechanics, the same emotional triggers, and eventually, the consumer starts to feel it. The excitement becomes familiar. The rare starts to feel routine. The drop starts to feel like marketing. The culture starts to feel managed. That is when hype begins to decay, not because people hate the brand, but because the brand becomes too predictable. And predictability is dangerous in culture. Because culture lives on surprise. It lives on authenticity. It lives on the feeling that something emerged naturally, not because a corporation scheduled it. This is where Nike's problem becomes deeper than footwear. Nike became so good at controlling culture that the control itself became visible. And once people see the machine, the magic weakens. For years, sneaker culture had a powerful illusion. The illusion of discovery. You found the right store. You knew the right release date. You understood the reference. You got the pair before everyone else. That feeling mattered. It made the shoe personal. But when sneaker culture moved deeper into apps, algorithms, resale platforms, and endless online drops, the experience changed. The hunt became digitized. The community became transactional. The story became resale value. The emotion became checkout speed. Win the raffle, beat the bot, refresh the app, pay the resale, post the flex, move on to the next release. At some point, the culture became exhausting. Sneakers were supposed to feel expressive, but the game started feeling mechanical. And when a culture becomes too mechanical, people eventually pull away. That is one reason the sneaker market started to feel different. The energy did not disappear overnight, but the obsession cooled. Consumers became more careful. The resale market became less euphoric. Certain shoes that once would have vanished instantly started sitting. Discounts became more visible. The same models appeared again and again. And people began asking a question that is dangerous for any hype brand. Do I actually want this? Or have I just been trained to chase it? That question can break a market, because hype depends on emotional momentum. It depends on people acting before they think too much. If the consumer pauses, the spell weakens. And Nike gave consumers reasons to pause. Part of the problem was overexposure. Nike's most iconic shoes became too available, too repeated, too familiar. The Jordan 1, the Dunk, the Air Force 1, the Retro Playbook. For years, these products worked because they carried memory. They connected generations. They made new consumers feel attached to old moments. But nostalgia has a limit. If a brand leans too heavily on the past, it risks teaching consumers that the best version of the brand already happened. That is dangerous, because a performance company cannot survive only as a museum. Nike's deepest identity is not supposed to be nostalgia. It is supposed to be movement, speed, risk, innovation, athletes pushing limits, the future of sport. But when too much attention goes to retro lifestyle products, the brand can start looking backward while competitors move forward. And that created an opening. Brands like Hoka and On made performance feel fresh. New Balance made comfort and quiet style feel culturally relevant. Adidas found moments of renewed energy through lifestyle and fashion. Smaller brands gained credibility by feeling less overexposed. And suddenly, Nike no longer felt like the only cool answer. That matters because cool is not permanent. Cool is borrowed attention. A brand has to keep earning it. Nike used to feel like the center of the culture. Then, in some categories, it started to feel like the default option. And default can be powerful. But default is rarely exciting. That is the difference between dominance and desire. Dominance means people know you. Desire means people still feel something when they see you. Nike still had dominance, but in parts of sneaker culture, desire was weakening. The issue was not that Nike became irrelevant. It was that Nike became too familiar, too common, too predictable, too available. And in fashion, being everywhere is a double-edged sword. It makes you big, then it makes you ordinary. For a brand built on aspiration, ordinary is dangerous, because aspiration requires distance. The consumer has to feel like the product is slightly above them, slightly ahead of them, slightly difficult to reach. But if the product is always there, always restocked, always discounted, always visible, the emotional distance collapses. The shoe becomes less of a symbol and more of an item. And once a symbol becomes an item, the pricing power changes. The resale power changes. The social power changes. The story changes. Nike's challenge was not just selling sneakers. It was protecting the meaning of sneakers. And meaning is fragile. You can spend decades building it, then weaken it by making too much of the thing that once felt special. That is the paradox of hype. The more you monetize it, the more you risk destroying it. The more you feed the market, the less hungry the market becomes. The more you tell people something is special, the less special it feels if everyone can get it. This is the business lesson. If you build a business around desire, you cannot treat desire like unlimited inventory. If your product feels special because it is scarce, overexposure will weaken it. If your brand feels premium because it carries meaning, too much repetition will dilute it. If your customers buy because of identity, you have to protect the story behind the product, not just the product itself. Because customers do not only leave when your product becomes bad. Sometimes they leave when your product becomes ordinary. And ordinary is where premium brands go to lose control. This is why sneaker culture became such a difficult machine to manage. Nike had to satisfy investors, retailers, athletes, fans, casual consumers, collectors, and resellers all at once. But those groups do not always want the same thing. Investors want growth. Retailers want inventory. Collectors want scarcity. Casual buyers want access. Athletes want performance. Streetwear fans want authenticity. Resellers want profit. That balance is almost impossible. If Nike makes too few pairs, consumers complain they can never win. If Nike makes too many, the product loses heat. If Nike keeps prices premium, buyers become more selective. If Nike discounts too much, the brand feels less exclusive. If Nike focuses on retro, critics say it lacks innovation. If Nike pushes innovation too hard, consumers may not adopt it quickly. That is the trap of being a cultural giant. Every move creates a trade-off. And the bigger the brand becomes, the harder it is to feel spontaneous. Nike's direct-to-consumer strategy added another layer. For years, Nike invested heavily in selling directly through its own stores, apps, and digital ecosystem. On paper, this made sense. Direct sales can give a company more control, more customer data, better margins, stronger relationships with consumers, less dependence on wholesalers. But culture does not only live inside a company's own channels. Sneaker culture was built across stores, neighborhoods, communities, athletes, retailers, collectors, and local tastemakers. When a brand pulls too much control into its own ecosystem, it can gain efficiency but lose texture. That matters. Because sneakers do not become meaningful only because a brand says they are meaningful. They become meaningful because communities give them meaning. Stores give them context. People give them stories. Subcultures give them credibility. The street gives them life. If everything becomes too centralized, too controlled, and too optimized, the brand can lose the messy cultural energy that made it powerful. That is one of the uncomfortable lessons of Nike's recent era. Optimization can grow a business, but over-optimization can weaken culture. The algorithm may know what sells, but the algorithm does not always know what feels alive. And sneaker culture has to feel alive. It cannot feel like a spreadsheet. It cannot feel like a release calendar built only to extract demand. It cannot feel like every emotional moment has been pre-planned by a marketing department. When consumers sense that, they start looking elsewhere. Not always consciously, but emotionally. They search for something that feels less obvious, less controlled, less mass-produced, more personal. That is why competitors gained attention, not only because their products were good, but because they offered a different emotional experience. Freshness. And freshness is powerful because it resets desire. Nike had history, but history can become heavy. A new brand does not carry the same burden. It does not have to protect decades of mythology. It can surprise people. It can feel discovered. It can grow into the emotional space that an older giant left open. That is how cultural shifts happen. Not always because the leader becomes bad. Sometimes because the leader becomes too familiar. And that is the deeper warning for every business. If your customers only choose you because they remember who you were, you are already in danger. Memory is not momentum. Recognition is not love. Familiarity is not desire. A strong brand cannot live forever on what it used to mean. It has to keep creating reasons to care now. Nike's problem was also connected to the consumer mood. The sneaker boom thrived in a world where people were willing to spend aggressively on identity. Limited releases, resale premiums, closet collections, social media flexing, the shoe as status. But consumer psychology changed. Inflation made people more cautious. The cost of living rose. Discretionary spending became more selective. And in a more pressured economy, hype purchases face more resistance. People start asking harder questions. Is this worth it? Do I need another pair? Will I actually wear this? Why is this so expensive? Why does every release feel the same? That kind of questioning is dangerous for any brand built on impulse and emotion. Because hype works best when the consumer does not slow down. When money feels tighter, the consumer slows down. And when the consumer slows down, the brand has to justify itself. Not with noise, with value, with innovation, with meaning, with a reason to believe. Nike still had reasons, but the reasons were no longer automatic. That is the shift. For years, the swoosh did a lot of the emotional work by itself. It meant greatness, it meant sport, it meant culture, it meant winning. But in a crowded market, a logo alone is not enough. The logo has to be attached to momentum, and momentum has to be renewed. You cannot inherit it forever. This is one of the hardest lessons for iconic brands. A legendary past creates trust, but it can also create complacency. The brand starts assuming people will care because they always cared. But new consumers do not owe loyalty to old mythology. They may respect the name, they may know the logo, they may recognize the silhouette. But culture is emotional, not historical. If the story does not feel alive now, it becomes heritage. And heritage is powerful. But heritage alone does not create urgency. Nike needed to make the future feel as exciting as the past, because the past can make a brand famous, but only the future can keep it dangerous. This is the real meaning of the so-called death of sneaker culture. It is not that sneakers are dead. It is that the old hype system is weakening. Limited drop, resale buzz, social media flex, repeat. For years, that cycle created energy. Then it created fatigue. Because when every product is treated like a moment, eventually no moment feels special. Scarcity once created urgency. Overproduction created hesitation. Resale once created proof of demand. Falling resale heat created doubt. Drops once created community. Too many drops created fatigue. Nike once made people feel like they were joining culture. Then, at times, it made people feel like they were being sold culture. That difference is enormous. People want to participate in culture. They do not want to feel manipulated by it. And when a brand crosses that line, the consumer may not rebel loudly. They simply stop caring as much. They scroll past. They wait. They choose something else. That is how cultural power weakens. Quietly. This is the Vexonomy lesson. A brand does not lose power only when people stop recognizing it. Sometimes it loses power when people recognize it too easily, when the symbol becomes too common, when the story becomes too repeated, when the culture becomes too manufactured, when the product that once made people feel different starts making everyone look the same. Nike did not lose sneaker culture because sneakers stopped mattering. Nike lost momentum because the meaning got diluted. And in culture, dilution is dangerous. Because the thing that makes people desire a product is often the same thing a company destroys when it tries to scale it too aggressively. Scarcity creates hunger. Too much access creates fatigue. Hype creates energy. Too much hype creates skepticism. Nostalgia creates emotion. Too much nostalgia makes the future feel empty. That is the trap Nike walked into. A company can be everywhere and still feel less powerful. A product can be famous and still feel less desirable. A logo can be iconic and still need to prove itself again. You are only as strong as the meaning people still attach to you. And meaning has to be renewed repeatedly. Nike's greatest challenge is not convincing people that it was legendary. Everyone already knows that. The challenge is convincing people that it is still leading the next chapter. Do not subscribe because Nike lost momentum. Subscribe if you want to understand the pattern before the next empire repeats it. This is Vexonomy, the psychology of wealth, power, and the systems quietly controlling how the world behaves. Because the next empire is already making the same mistake.